This is Digaris Masculist MGTOW Flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo Digaris. This is flyer number 616, entitled The Use of Masculist Hatred to Liberate Men, Part 2, continuing straight on. Masculists want the establishment of GECs, G-E-Cs, Gender Equality Committees, in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally, in capital letters, which is certainly not the case today, since nearly all feminists today have been powerfully brainwashed that gender oppression is a one-way street. Monoconscious feminists are seen by masculists as being feminazi bitchy, since these feminists believe that gender oppression is a one-way street, so of course they hate men. When masculists are confronted with monoconscious feminists, they express their hatred of these MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots. About to sneeze. And bite their fucking heads off with verbally violent and hateful masculist harangues, saying things like, quote, "Learn some masculism, you hated monoconscious feminazi cunt. Learn that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that in reality women oppress men far worse with their horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men, the worst three being women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering. We masculists target your currently monoconscious male feminist boyfriends, teaching them masculism so that they become bi-conscious, knowing that gender oppression is a two-way street. So they then see your monoconscious feminism as sexist, hypocritical, and bigoted. They then become disgusted with you and dump you. So the longer you remain monoconscious, the higher the odds are that you will lose your boyfriend. So you'll be punished severely by the bi-conscious masculists, who will force you into a slow, miserable death, the way that masculists do to fluffies, by totally ignoring you, not even pumping and dumping you, since masculists have a hatred of manslaving, divorce-raping fluffies, and an even greater hatred of hypocritical, genocidal, monoconscious feminists. Why do masculists use masculist hatred as a strategy? Because it's more effective than the men's lib strategies used by the other two main branches of the manosphere, that is the MRM, that's Men's Rights Movement, and the MGTOW, that's men going their own way. The MRM have taken mostly a poor little me victim approach to men's lib that lists how men suffer in so many ways from their traditional breadwinner role. For example, higher suicide rates, more severe punishments for identical crimes, greater job fatalities, etc. Men don't identify strongly with the victim mentality the way women do, since men are socialized to be tough, to face up to challenges. But hatred, men do understand and react strongly towards, since women sexually selected men over thousands of generations to be warlike, to conquer neighboring tribes, to take over their resources, which benefited the women's tribe, so these women were more likely to survive. Men are warlike, who express their hatred physically in war. So masculists use masculist hatred of fluffies and fluffy feminists to evoke men's innate ability to express hatred at them for the horrible gender crimes that fluffies and fluffy feminists commit against men. I consider it likely that in about a year or two, the male journalists in the media will take up the masculist message that is fueled by hatred a lot more readily than they have with the MRM and the MGTOWs. The MRM has been spectacularly unsuccessful over the decades. The masculists agree with the goals of the MRM, that is, the men-fairing of the gender laws, particularly in the divorce courts, the legislation of the PARA, the OP-TAB, the creation of GECs, gender equality committees, etc. But Maskus feel that the non-hateful approach of the MRM is the main reason for the awful legal impotence of the MRM. The Maskus have a contempt for the MGTOWs, seeing them as apolitical wimps who merely walk away individually from marriage and paternity, arguing that they, that is the MGTOW, are powerless to fight the political and legal dominance of the feminists in today's society. Maskus sneer at the self-defeating gutlessness of the MGTOWs and don't respect them. Maskus do admit, however, that if there are enough MGTOWs, then that will have a profound impact on society due to the MGTOW boycott of marriage and paternity. MGTOWs refuse to be subject to the 1 in 4 chance of being butchered in the hated fluffy feminist controlled divorce courts, losing custody of his kids with a 90% probability, losing his house to his fluffy ex-wife, half his wealth and stuff to her, forced to make child payments to his kids, whom he's barely allowed to see, and if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat, manslaving, divorce-raping ass and fip up. So she then continues to parasite off him after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. Maskus are critical of MGTOWs, seeing them as being stuck in a whole gender political phase behind the Maskless. That is, the MGTOWs are still stuck in the male consciousness raising phase, talking about female psychology and how women oppress men, etc., whereas the Maskless have moved on and are concentrating on the second major gender political phase, that is, politics. That is, making political and legislative changes in society that will benefit billions of men around the world. For example, the legislation of the PARA, that's paternity rejection right, the OPTAB, OPTAB, the creation of GECs, GECs, the fipping of women, etc. Maskless are contemptuous of the level of political myopia of MGTOWs and despise them for that, and for the level of cowardness shown by the MGTOWs against the monopoly of the feminists in society and in the parliaments. Maskus use hate to liberate men, arguing that men identify a lot more readily with Maskus' expression of hatred than with the MRM's poor little me approach or the total apolitical passivity of the wimpy MGTOWs. The next few years will show whether the expression of the Maskus hatred approach will be more effective in strongly attracting the attention of the media, especially from male journalists, than the victim approach of the MRM or the political passivity and the non-expression of solidarity with other men of the MGTOWs. Fully justified hatred rouses passions in people. People go to war for these reasons. The Maskus have a hatred of fluffies for their manslaving, divorce-raping gender crimes against men, and an even greater hatred for the fluffy feminists, who are bad enough being fluffies, but are also hypocrites and genociders, so are even more despised and spat at by Maskless. As Maskless ideas spread, women will feel they have been hit by a bus, the Maskless bus. Masculism will force women to grow up, to fip up, and not expect to parasite off the labour and money of a man by pulling her financial weight, by being a financially responsible adult. Women now have, thanks to men, a career window of half a century. So Maskless argue now that women can work. They must work, or be exterminated slowly by Maskless for being manslaving, divorce-raping vermin. Maskless refuse to have relationships with fluffies and force them to rot on the shelf. Maskless also refuse to have relationships with fluffy feminists, whom are even more hated since they are seen by Maskless to be hypocrites and genociders. As most men become infected by the maskless virus, having their maskless consciousness raised, then fluffies will die out, since nearly all men will utterly refuse to deal with them. A fluffy can only be a fluffy if she can get her financial claws into some gullible, stupid, man-slavable man. But thanks to the manosphere, particularly to maskless hatred of fluffy manslavery, the supply of such men, such man-slavable men, is drying up rapidly. So fluffies are forced to fip up, or they don't eat. Monoconscious feminists are increasingly being harangued by angry, hateful maskless who don't tolerate the monoconscious bigotry and hypocrisy of today's feminists, who are utterly brainwashed that gender oppression is a one-way street. Maskless verbally attack such monoconscious feminists with real male verbal violence and hatred, teaching these feminists that the longer they remain monoconscious, the more likely they are to lose their boyfriends, who are currently being targeted by the maskless, who teach these boyfriends masculism, who then see their monoconscious girlfriends as bigots and then dump them. These biconscious maskless boyfriends will express their hatred of their feminist monoconscious ex-girlfriends and move on to have relationships with biconscious feminist girlfriends, who are a lot nicer to be with, since their biconscious feminist girlfriends have lost their monoconscious feminazi bitchiness, since they can see that gender oppression is a two-way street, so that feminist anger at men's gender oppression of women is cancelled by maskless anger at women's gender oppression of men. So biconscious feminists lose their hatred of men, because it is countered by maskless hatred of women, that is, gender criminal women who commit horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men, that the maskless are aiming to wipe out, that is, the gender crimes themselves, by killing slowly those women who commit these hated gender crimes by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, thus removing their fluffy feminist genes from the gene pool. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 610 plus maskless flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.